Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you for tuning into this webinar today. My name is Basha. I'm one of the education advisors here at the Fulbright Commission. Tonight, we'll be looking at the overview of choosing, funding, applying for U.S. study in the postgraduate level. And we will end with a Q&A. So we ask that you hold off your questions until the end. And just a reminder that the webinar will be recorded and available for you later on this week. What is the US-UK Fulbright Commission? We are a not-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by the US and the UK government to promote peace and cultural understanding throughout the educational exchange. So we focus on opportunities and exchanges between the US and the UK as part of a global program. And we promote educational exchange at Fulbright by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and research in the US and the UK, and also an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying to US universities. Now, this advisory service is part of the EducationUSA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international and student advising centers throughout the whole world. And our aim as EducationUSA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we are also the only official source of US study in the UK. So why study in the US? In the US, there are a wide range of choices for universities. So there are over 1,700 universities that offer postgraduate degrees in the US. Now, this is compared to about 120 in the UK. So there's a lot of variety in different institutions and also amongst different academic departments that you could have in the US. Studying in the US also gives you an opportunity to internationalize your CV. Employers cite cross-cultural experience as a very attractive quality on a CV. And it gives you an opportunity to have a diverse experience and demonstrate independence that's necessary to study abroad. It also gives you an opportunity to form a global networking relationship. So it's an unparalleled opportunity to create those global networks, not only with American faculty and institutions, but also with the diverse colleagues, which make up many US universities. You could gain practical experience. So there are many different opportunities for hands-on research, including things like internships and teaching opportunities whilst you're studying. And you could expand your horizons as well. So living and studying in another country expands your worldwide view and expands your opportunities or expands the opportunities that might be available to you in the future. And also there is a lot of funding opportunities. Now, this may surprise some of you, but a final top reason to study in the US is funding opportunities. Now, there are a lot of different funding schemes and scholarships that are available on the postgraduate level, and we will talk about these later on. So what are some of the differences between studying in the US versus the UK? One of the main differences is the duration. So typically in the US, the programs are longer. A master's will last 2 years, although there are some one-year programs out there as well. And a PhD will range typically from between 4 to 6 years. And this may vary depending on the program and the department that you're part of. There's also an integrated master's in the PhD in the US in the first year or two of the coursework. Now, those who have a master's already can use this time to sharpen their skills or gain more experience by teaching or doing additional research as an assistant, for example. But typically keep in mind that a master's is a mandatory component of a postgraduate degree in the US. There's also no pure research degrees in the US, and programs include coursework even on postgraduate level. There's also no set fees or standard application deadlines. So these vary greatly by university and even by department in regards to the fees and the deadlines you will have. And postgraduate programs are organized by the department. So they're not organized by a supervisor, and you do not need to know your supervisor beforehand, especially since some programs are more interdisciplinary, which may mean that you might have multiple supervisors or even a committee. And you also don't need to have an in-depth research proposal, as they expect you to figure this out throughout the program. Also, law and medicine are studied at the postgraduate level in the US. So what is the timeline for applying to US universities? So we recommend that you begin to research programs about 12 to 18 months before enrollment. And you will finalize a selection of between 3 to 6 universities to where you will be applying to around 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And also around the same time, you want to take any required admission exams that you might have to take, and you will begin your applications. Now, about 8 to 10 months before you enroll, you will put together an application and submit that application according to the deadlines for each program. Around 4 to 7 months beforehand, in the spring before you enroll, you could expect to hear back from universities you apply to with their admission decision. And based off where you were accepted, you will notify universities of your decision, and you will also apply for a visa. So this is typically 1 to 3 months before enrollment. Now, we have additional resources on our website to help with your pre-departure, including things like travel advice, the living arrangements, campus life, etc. And you would typically start university around mid-August to early September, which is slightly earlier than here in the UK. Now, there are over 1,700 institutions offering postgraduate programs. So there are a lot of options, and each institution and department will be completely different. So how do you go about narrowing down where you want to actually apply? Now, the term that we like to focus a lot here at Fulbright Commission is the idea of fit. Now, what this means is that we want for students to find a program that is really going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. So the first step in choosing process is to locate factors that are important to you. We recommend that you make a list of what will really matter to you whilst you're studying out there in the US. So don't just look at universities that you have heard of straight away, or ones that you've seen mentioned in movies or television programs, or ones that have the highest rankings, as you might actually miss out on some great universities and great university programs in your discipline. So some factors to consider whilst you're narrowing down those choices and looking at your fit is the types of institutions. Do you want to go to a big public university or a private, smaller university? Do you want a big campus or a small one? Or maybe you're somewhere in between and you want to go to a medium university. Another thing to consider is the program type. So at the postgraduate level, this is arguably more important than the institution itself. So you should consider your career goals, the qualifications you want to gain, and any concentrations you might be interested in. Think about if you want to be in a program with funded internship opportunities, or maybe you want to be part of a program where you could get grant writing experience whilst you're there. Another thing to consider is the academic department. So choosing the right department is almost as important as choosing the right university at postgraduate level. This will influence so much of your experience in the US. If you think about it, at the postgraduate level, the academic department generally handles things like the admissions, they design the course structure for students, and they monitor a student's progression throughout the program. So it's very important that you look at that as part of the factor to consider. And it's also essential to research the department to find the right academic home for you. So as I mentioned, departments can vary drastically at each university, and they could vary in areas of faculty expertise, the elective courses or concentrations you might be able to take, whether they are tightly focused or maybe they are more interdisciplinary. They'll vary in the size or atmosphere, and they'll also vary in opportunities for teaching and research, the type of conferences you might be able to attend, and the type of internships that are available. Another factor to consider is the location. So the US is a massive country that spans across 6 different time zones. So think about, do you want to be somewhere urban or rural? Do you want to live in a big city, a small town? Maybe you want to live in a medium city or a big town. Is climate something that's important to you? Do you want to live somewhere where the weather is quite mild for majority of the year? Or do you want to go somewhere where you actually get to experience the 4 seasons? You might also want to think about access to transportation. Will the place have public transportation that is easy accessible? Or will you live somewhere that you might need to have a car to get to campus or get from where you live to your internships or work? Also have a look at centers of excellence in your field. So if you live in Washington, D.C., they'll probably have centers of excellence for political science, just like New York might be for finance as well. And you might want to look at what extracurricular opportunities there are available for you as well on campus. And the last factor to consider is finances. So we will talk more in depth about funding later in the webinar, but if funding is important to you, then this needs to be part of your choosing process right from the beginning. So we oftentimes funding, especially funding from universities, is actually awarded and applied for alongside the application process. So you don't want to start thinking about it after you've applied and been accepted, because at that point, it might already be too late, and we wouldn't want you to be disappointed later down the line. And we always say to follow the money. So if you need funding to pursue a postgraduate study in the US, make sure that you look for those opportunities from the start. So with that in mind, and so many different factors to consider, how do you go about narrowing down your options? So our website has a page on choosing a university, which actually includes a list of helpful links and search engines, such as Peterson's and grad school as well. You could also contact previous professors from universities to see whether they have any advice or opinions on schools that could be a good fit for you. You could contact professionals or colleagues in your field and see what schools they attended and in which discipline it was in. Thinking through the work of scholars you have previously read. Is there someone you have identified as doing the kind of research you would like to do? Maybe you could find out where they are teaching now, or maybe what their colleagues are working on currently to help you narrow down those options. Now, we advise that you narrow down your choices of universities to about 10 to research a bit further. Now, here's an example of the Peterson's website. So this is one search engine that's linked on our website, and it's particularly helpful to decide and rank what factors are important to you in choosing a university. So we will use this tool to look for graduate level schools and programs in a particular field. And in our case, we will be looking at programs in anthropology. So as you could see, the search engine pulls up the results of different universities with departments or programs in anthropology. And then on the left sidebar, you could select a variety of different factors, such as location, tuition fees, the school size, and it will narrow down the list even further. Now, once you narrow your choices to about 10 universities of interest, you should research them further on the university website and reach out to them directly. So the goal is to select about 3 to 6 institutions where you will actually submit your application to. Now, on the university websites, you could find more information on their faculty, and some even list the CVs of their faculty members and their research interests, and a list of their publications as well. You could also find contact information for specific professors to reach out to. And you could reach out to them and find out if they're still working or if they are working on something that interests you as well. We also recommend that you reach out to current grad students, as they could give you valuable insight into their experience as a graduate student at that particular university. You could ask them what kind of projects they are working on, how close the relationship between the professors and the graduate students is, how close they are with their supervisor, and maybe even what the campus culture is like at that specific university. And you could also ask them more questions about the local area, what it's like, how to go about finding a good apartment, and even what the cost of living is in that particular place. Now, another way to research the universities is to contact the departments, as they could usually put you in touch by email with a current student. And it might be a good way to determine if the university is a good fit for you and if you'd like to study there as well. So how do you go about funding your studies? Funding is one of the top things we get asked about here at the Fulbright Commission. And there's a big misconception about funding US universities, that it's always more expensive. But the good news is that there's actually a significant amount of funding available on the postgraduate level, and particularly if you are willing to be flexible and go into the process with an open mind. So where is this money I'm talking about? There are 4 types of funding for studying in the US. So the first one is personal or family funds. Now, there's a big culture in the US of saving and paying for university in a way that we don't actually have here in the UK, because we have the loan-based system. And there is an expectation that you will make some kind of contribution to your studies. Another source of funding is the actual US universities. So they are actually the best resource for funding. And there are 2 most common types of university-based funding. The first one is fellowships. So these are outright grants that allow recipients to focus solely on their work. And there's assistantships. And these are offered in return for services provided to the department. So it could either be teaching, you would help with the research, or maybe lab supervision, or even working in a campus office in exchange for fees waiver, health insurance, and sometimes even a stipend. Now, assistantships are renewable year to year if the student maintains specified academic standards. And keep in mind that terms of assistantships will vary dramatically between universities and even between departments. And they will depend on available grants, the field of study, and even the department need. So it's always important to ask the department or the program about this kind of funding when you're choosing where to apply. Now, there's also more funding generally available for PhDs and students in a research-focused master's than for professional degree students. And this also varies by subject area. So for example, the sciences tend to receive more funding than programs in the humanities. So it's important that you check with multiple offices about funding opportunities. We recommend that you check with the department you're applying for, the graduate school if the university has one, and also the financial aid office. Another source of funding is external funding bodies. So these are what we call niche scholarships. And they're basically institutions that are separate to the universities that offer scholarships for students. So these might be different companies, charities, or foundations. And the last source of funding is loans. So most US lenders will actually require a US citizen to co-sign on a loan. Therefore, most UK citizens take out private loans from a UK bank. However, we actually highly encourage you to examine the terms and interest rates closely, and loans be your last resource of funding. Also, if you are an American or dual US-UK citizen, you could take out a loan from a US lender and apply for US federal loans through FAFSA. And as I mentioned before, university and external funding is the preferred option, since you don't actually have to pay it back. So what is a funding strategy that we advise you to consider? So there's different strategies to kind of try and lower the cost and manage your expenses. And you might think of 3 different approaches when you go about this. So the first one is that you could reduce the cost of living. So living in a big city will be more expensive than living somewhere rural. Just like in the UK, living in London is more expensive than living in Lancaster. It's the same in the US. Living in New York City or Los Angeles will be more expensive than living somewhere in Ohio or Michigan, for example. You could also look to lower your tuition costs. So public universities, so state-funded universities, generally have lower costs than private universities. However, keep in mind that private universities might actually offer more funding. And also, funding will vary by department within each university. So when you're doing your research, make sure you keep those factors in mind as well. And another strategy you could look at is for university funding. So in addition to the ways we've already talked about, you could seek funding outside of your program. A good example is if you're studying architecture, but you have interest in environmental architecture and maybe making buildings more green, you could look to seek funding from 2 different departments. Now, caution that you might not necessarily be able to use all of these strategies in one go, and you might find that universities with low tuition actually have fewer funding opportunities. So once again, beware of the different factors at play when you're doing your research. Now, here's a good example about using those factors kind of to lower the cost. If you look at Boston University's cost of attendance within the Department of Education and Human Development, it's over $85,000, including tuition, room and board, and other fees that are applicable. Now, if you compare that to an MA at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, the tuition and off-campus finances would actually be $40,000 less. So you'd be living in the same city, but a great variance in tuition and fees that you'd have to pay. So make sure that you stay open-minded. And also something to keep in mind is sometimes universities that are close to each other will have links and relationships with each other, where you might be able to take classes at Boston University while studying at University of Massachusetts. So that's just another factor to keep in mind when you're doing your research. So now I'd like to take a little look at a few examples of how to identify funding opportunities. So for university funding, the best resource is actually the university website. You should look at the department, the graduate school, and the financial aid pages on the university's website. And check all 3, as sometimes not all funding opportunities are advertised centrally. So have a look at what they say. Do they actually have much funding available? Universities generally try to give an accurate but a conservative measure of how much funding they actually have on offer. Now, if this information isn't available online, this might suggest that they can't offer a lot of financial support, but it's also worth getting in touch with the department administrator or director to actually inquire about this. Also, think about whether you will be competitive for funding at that particular institution. Will you be a top student? As current students, how actually competitive funding really is and what their assistantships involve. What's the work-life balance like? So try to get the inside scoop. Maybe find out how many assistantships are there available. Is it only one, or do they have an abundance of them? Are they full or partial? If possible, try to find out what basis they award assistantships on. Do you have to take an admission exam and score high? And is that something that's factored into this decision? Or is it more based on your other academics or maybe your prior experience? Find out if there are any extra requirements that you need to fulfill to be considered for an assistantships. Some universities automatically consider students, but in some cases, you might have to submit an additional essay or even a resume. And now we're going to see an example of what you could look out for on universities' websites. So this is the website of the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And this is a top public research university. Now, we have highlighted some key points in their section about fellowships and assistantships and how to identify when a university has funding available. So as you can see, most universities who are generous with funding will make it quite obvious on their website. And in the Department of Political Science, they note that most students in their department are supported by fellowships and assistantships. They also explain that duties typically range from 10 to 15 hours per week, and they list the types of duties you could expect. It also mentions eligibility for a variety of fellowships, and also notes that Chapel Hill has a lower cost of living. So you could see that the 2 points of the funding strategy actually exist here, both university funding and lower cost of living. Now, there are some resources for exploring external funding scholarships as well. So there are a lot of online scholarship searches. Quite a few of them are actually listed on our website, Postgraduate Guide. And you could use these to help narrow down the thousands of scholarships available based on your country of origin, the field of study that you want to partake in. And this will allow you to find out more information about the eligibility as well. You also want to refer to the funding body's website for information about the application process and the deadlines. Now, as you could see, there are many different scholarships available scholarships from external funding available. And these are some of the scholarship searches that are listed on our website as well. And you could go to them and actually see different non-university scholarships available. You could narrow them down, as I mentioned before, by different factors. And one of the scholarships is actually the Fulbright Awards, which I'm just going to mention quickly. So it's an example of a scholarship from an external funding body. The funding is available for UK students to study and conduct research in the US and vice versa at the postgraduate level. There are a number of awards that fluctuates each year, and applications are now open with a deadline beginning of May for study beginning the following year. So this is, you would apply for the scholarship before you have even applied to a university. There are a variety of awards available, and some are only for your first year, and others partner awards are fully funded. So check out our website for more detail about the Fulbright Awards. We also offer an IIE placement model this year, which actually provides more generous funding and support with funding the right university for you. If you have any specific questions about the Fulbright Awards, you could email programs@fulbright.org.uk. So that's Fulbright with 1 L. So what are some funding tips? As I mentioned at the beginning, applying for funding often happens simultaneously to the admission process. So begin your research for funding early. It's important that you're willing to put in the time and effort to seek out and apply for funding opportunities. So scholarships will not find you. You need to investigate university funding and take the time to search for the often niche external scholarships. As you've seen in the previous slide, there are quite a few external scholarships that are available. You just need to take the time and search for them to find them. You should also be flexible in choosing the university you go to. If it's essential for you to receive funding to complete your postgraduate study, make sure you choose departments with a lot of funding or where you are a very competitive or a top student. So you could, a lot of the times you could find exam scores and even grades of last year's admitted students on the university websites. Now, for university funding, the best resource is the university website. So once again, make sure you check out the department, the graduate school, and the financial aid pages. Check out all three. Another thing to keep in mind is that you could also typically work on campus up to 20 hours a week during term time and up to 40 hours a week during holidays. However, these expected earnings, they cannot be calculated for visa purposes when showing proof of funds. So that's just something to keep in mind. So now we've discussed a guide to choosing process and how to determine your fit at a particular university and program, as well as ways to fund your studies in the US. And here I'd like to reiterate that doing that in-depth research and in the choosing process is very important. So when you get familiar with the program you're looking at, you could then put together the most competitive application possible for them. And the more competitive your application, the better your chances are at securing funding. So you want to be that top students with the top application. And the more time you spend in the research process, the more benefit it will bring you in the application and funding process as well. And in this section, I'm going to bring you through the main components of completing an application. So what are US universities looking for? Well, the detail actually varies in program applications. So an application for an MBA versus molecular physics will be completely different. US universities look for academic achievements, so they would be measured by your undergraduate or, if applicable, postgraduate degree results, and also admission test scores, if applicable. Most universities want to see at least a 2.2 on a bachelor's degree. Now you can contact individual departments or programs about whether your qualifications are sufficient to be considered for admissions as well. They won't actually be able to tell you the strict entry requirements, but they should be able to give you an approximate idea of whether your academic profile is roughly in line with their usual admitted students. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, you could find that information on their website. So they will put the academic profile of previous year's intake as well. They also look at academic fit, which is very important. So they want to find out your reasons for pursuing a postgraduate degree at their institution. And how does it help towards your goals? Do you have any relevant work experience or any relevant coursework? Or do you have any extracurricular involvement that would help you fit in with their university life? The universities in the US want to see a pattern of relevant work and study experience that would lay a strong academic and practical foundation for your studies. And they also want to see your ability and interest in being involved both in and outside the classroom. Most US campuses are very lively places, and they want to see the personality of their applicants coming out in that campus life. They may also want to know why you want to study in the US specifically. Why not in the UK or a different country? So in the application components, there are actually no standard processes for applications in the US. They will vary by university and even by department. Each university can set their own deadlines and application requirements as they please. However, keep in mind, most applications will follow a very similar format, and you might be able to reuse or adapt the materials you prepare for each. Most applications will include an application form with your basic information and demographics. It would include admissions, test scores, which will be sent to the university by the organization that administered the test. Now, admission test scores are not required for all postgraduate degrees, so you should check if you have to take any on the university website. The components will also include a transcript. So this is a list of your academic marks. And you could usually ask your department, university, or registrar's office for a transcript of your undergraduate or master's document. You also need to include a personal statement. So this will describe your academic interest, your professional and personal goals, any relevant experience. And this is an opportunity to put forth any personal history or context and kind of sell yourself to the program. You'll also be required to submit 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And some universities may provide some loose guidelines for selecting your referees. For example, they might ask for 1 letter from an academic or professional referee. But make sure you choose someone that knows you very well, both in and out of the classroom as well. You might have to submit a CV, which will list your professional and extracurricular accomplishments. And you might even have an interview. This is usually required for students applying for an MBA and occasionally for research degrees too, depending on the program. You might have an audition if you're applying for programs in the arts. And also, you might have to submit a portfolio of work if you're an art student. And some students applying for research-focused degrees may be asked to submit some kind of a writing sample. And finally, there's an application fee of between $50 and $150 per application. And this is in part why we suggest to apply to about 3 to 6 universities to kind of lower the cost as well. So one thing you want to think about when you're choosing universities is how does your academic profile compare to the other applicants? So how do the universities measure you up as a potential colleague or students? US University will consider your grades or all your UK qualifications. And they will also look at test scores. So they will look at US admission scores if applicable. They might look at your research. So they might look at the dissertation that you did as part of your undergraduate degree. And they look at your work experience. So some programs, especially MBAs, this is very important, whilst other programs, this might be so important. And they also look at the X factor. So they look at things that make you stand out to determine if you'd likely be accepted or competitive for funding. Now, as an international student, maybe you had a really unique undergraduate program, and you can make a very strong case as to why you would bring something unique to their program and the US university life. They're looking for an interesting mix of ideas and people on their program and on their campus. So I've talked about admission tests. Admission tests in the US act as a method of evaluation, as there's a lack of national curriculum, and this gives them a way to kind of level the playing field a little bit. Some of the admission tests are the GREs, which is the graduate record exam, and this measures your verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. And the GREs are mostly for your applicable to master's programs. There's also the GMATs. These are used for MBAs programs and business programs. The LSATs, which are used for JD programs, but not for LLM law programs. Those require a first degree in law instead. There's also the MCATs, which are used for all MD programs and medical admissions. And these are quite different to what we're kind of used to in the UK. They're all multiple choice and they have very strict time limit. You might be able to find some practice admission tests online, and you might want to take them in the strict time limit as well to see how you do. Now, you might ask, how important are standardized tests in admission decisions? Well, this completely depends on universities. Some universities may not require them at all, and for others, it might factor into their decision. But keep in mind, they're more interested in your personal statement and your transcript than just your admission test score. You might find that some programs will be more interested in your analytical writing and maybe verbal reasoning scores than how you did on the quantitative reasoning section as well. It will actually just vary university by university and even from program to program. Now, to ensure that you take the appropriate test, you should consult the website of each university to which you plan to apply, and pay close attention to the university's application deadline and plan your exam schedule accordingly. So we advise that you register early for exams, as it kind of gives you options to retake the exam if necessary, and do prepare for the exam. As I mentioned, there are free prep materials online, and there are options to buy study guides as well. Also, since COVID, a lot of the exams are very accessible and they're online. So you could take them basically at home. You could take the GRE at home, and the GMAT is also available online as well. So a personal statement is one of the most important parts of the application process. So this is not like your UCAS personal statement, but it's an opportunity to showcase what you could bring to the university. It's not an in-depth research proposal. Some universities may ask for separate research statements that outline your research interests and future plans, but a personal statement is not that. Some universities may also ask for essays instead of statements, and others might ask you to address something specific. So they might ask you a specific question that you have to answer instead of writing a personal statement. So make sure that you check the requirements very carefully on each university's website. And keep in mind that these statements help reveal your individual character. They should show your motivation, your future goals, what your interests are in a particular university or a particular program or field as well. So writing your personal statement, there's usually no set structure for writing this, and it gives you the opportunity to be creative and make yourself stand out from the other applicants. So some students choose to start with some kind of an anecdote describing maybe how they became interested in their field of study. Others might use a central theme to link and describe their experiences and future plans for their studies and careers. but it's important not to be modest. This is the time to sell yourself as an applicant. This is what admission counselors will read. It's kind of how they get to make their first impression of you as a person. There's a lot more tips on our website, including some examples of successful personal statements as well, if you want to have a look. Letters of recommendation. So you will likely be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. You should ask a variety of people who know you well to write these letters. And keep in mind that some universities may ask for or may provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. So they might actually ask for 1 letter from an academic or a professional referee. If you have multiple academic referees to choose from, make sure you choose someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom, just so they could showcase you more as a person, not just someone, you know, that did well in their classroom. It's important that you choose referees that will complement your application package and each other. So you get a good balance of classroom and professional recommendation, maybe research and extracurricular recommendation as well. Now, we recommend that you meet with your referee to discuss this letter, and it might be helpful to give a copy of your application or transcript or even your CV to the referee. And you could tell them reasons for doing a postgraduate degree in the US or even in your chosen field, and maybe what your interests in the particular university that you selected are, or your future goals are as well. Make sure that the referee is aware of any deadlines and paperwork that needs to be complete. Once again, these letters are a marketing tool for you as an applicant. So you can make suggestions for the content of the letter, but it's important that you don't see the letter before it gets sent off to the university. And it's kind of to maintain the credibility of the letter. You could direct referees to mention things like maybe your ability to succeed at the postgraduate level, or if they've made any observations about your performance. Maybe you have a good ability to positively contribute in class. Maybe you have great leadership abilities or a great character, or maybe you just have a great passion for your subject of your choice. So it's important that you encourage referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. Keep in mind that American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone, and they use very positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom. And bear in mind what will be written about your American counterparts when preparing your UK referees to write the letters. So this isn't a time to be modest. It's kind of time for them to boast about you and your skills. So what are some ways that we can help? As I mentioned before, you could visit our website for advice, guides, and events that we have. Under our Education USA Advice tab, you could scroll down to Postgraduate Study in the USA, and you could find different details on choosing, funding, and applying to the US. And in our program sections, there are details about the Fulbright Awards and each award category, what the benefits are, what the selection criteria is, and application procedures as well. You could book a one-to-one video appointment with one of our advisors. You could book that on our website, or you could just email us if you have any questions. The email is advising@fulbright.org.uk. So that's Fulbright with 1 L. We also host and attend various events throughout the year, both virtually and in person, so such as this webinar. And this brings us to the end of the webinar. If you have any general questions that could be helpful for everyone, or if you have specific questions that you like to answer, you could pop them in the Q&A box. And if you have any Fulbright Award questions, you could send those to programs@fulbright.org.uk. So we have a few questions. First one is, will the recording be shared with us? Yes, you have access to the recording probably by Friday, if not early next week. Someone asked if I could elaborate on what you mean by there are no set fees. So in the US, the universities are not governed by any body. So they're not governed by the government or by anyone else. And they're allowed to set different fees for their tuition. And basically, they could kind of choose what fee they are. It's not like here in the UK where the fees are governed by the government and you know exactly how much undergrad and postgrad is going to cost you. In the US, each university can make up their own tuition fees, their room and board fees, etc. So they will vary drastically from university to university. Someone asked, how many times can we take a standardized test and how far in advance are our results valid for admission? So you could take the standardized tests as many times as you'd like, but keep in mind every time you take it, you do have to pay a fee to take the test. In regards to how far in advance the results are varied, I'm not 100% sure. You might be able to see that either on each standardized test website, or you might have to contact the university to ask if they'd accept the results of a test from a certain date, or how far you could go back. Someone asked, how do we gain access to previously recorded webinars? All our webinars are available on our YouTube channel. There's a question about if I can clarify that the May 2023 deadline for 24-25 admission is not for partner awards. When will the deadline for partner awards be? That's a very good question. Right now, off the top of my head, I don't know. I know the deadline for the Fulbright Awards is, I believe, the 3rd of May. But if you go on our website, you should be able to find the deadline for the partner awards. If you can't find that on our website, what I recommend is that you contact the programs team as who should give you the information. How long are reference letters supposed to be? Most reference letters should be about A4. Some universities might give you a guideline of how long they should be. You could see some examples if you Google reference letters for university postgraduates. You should be able to find some examples of really good reference letters that have been written, but about an A4 would be ideal. Another question is, do we have to apply for Fulbright Award 1 year before apply to the university and take the test? So currently the Fulbright Awards that close in May are applicable for admission 24-25. So in this case, yes, you would have to apply for the Fulbright Award even before you knew which university you wanted to study, or what, in a sense, what you want to study as well. And you would apply for those as well before taking any admission tests. So there's a question about information on visas. We don't provide any information on visas. You'd have to contact the embassy directly if you have any specific visa questions. Is there an official standardized test website? Each test will have their own website. So if you just Google the name of the test, you should be able to find the official website. I believe in our postgraduate guide, we also have the official links to each standardized test official website as well. There's a couple more questions. So there's a question about recapping on the timelines of everything, like application, Fulbright application, and tests. So the Fulbright application is closes on the 3rd of May, I believe, and that's for admission year 24-25. For university applications, when you have to take the tests, etc., if you go on our postgraduate guide, you could find the timeline for everything that I've mentioned in the webinar. Okay, those are all the questions for now. If you have any specific questions about the Fulbright Awards, if you email programs, which I'm actually gonna just post the email address in the chat. So the programs team will be able to answer any specific questions about the Fulbright Awards, the all-discipline Fulbright Awards, the independent placement, and the partner awards as well. And if you have any other questions, you could email us at advice@fulbright.org.uk, where we'll be able to answer any other questions. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And like I said, the webinar will be available for viewing, I'm hoping by Friday, if not on Monday or Tuesday next week. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.